All right, kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome everybody to our Kaitiaki Forum. It's a speakers forum where Flora and Fauna of Aotearoa, which is a non-profit environmental group, national group, likes to bring together people from around the country to share important information on a variety of different issues. These are often issues that go unspoken or don't really make it into the public realm, or if they do, there's a lot of misinformation around them. So it's a really important opportunity, I think, for us to learn about some of these things and empower ourselves with some of the knowledge that's going to be shared with us, and maybe to make some connections. So, and also today is International Environment Day, and I'm pretty sure every single one of you, every day is the day that we care about Papatūānuku and the environment. But just nice to put this out there in honor, in honor of our planet and our beautiful, beautiful Aotearoa New Zealand, and come together and start taking collective action, through dialogue and conversations, and then further planning and strategies around how we can start to heal our environment and heal ourselves in the process. So a really, really warm welcome to you all. So I think that it would be good to start us off with a karakia before we invite our first speaker to open up the floor to the first speaker. We will have a Q&A at the end of our speakers. So there will be 4 speakers. We have Alison White, Claire Bleakley, Dr. Wendy Pond, Rehana Robinson will be joining in there with Wendy, in behind Wendy, because it's related to some of those issues that Wendy's talking about. And then hopefully, if there's time, I would like to come in at the end and talk about some of the food sovereignty things that we have been working on up here in Northland. So let's just, if we wouldn't mind, just taking a nice deep breath in. And just grounding ourselves, rooting ourselves deep down into this beautiful planet that we share with each other and with all the creatures and the flora and fauna. And how can we bring about the highest good for all of us and raise awareness around the healing that needs to happen? And spreading out our love and appreciation, our gratitude to everybody who's joining us today, and our gratitude for this beautiful earth and all of the nourishment that it gives us. Thank you. All right. So Wendy, if you wouldn't mind turning off your video, and I'll do the same. I'd like to open up the floor and invite Alison White from the Safe Food Campaign to share with us about a really important report that's come out recently on a common pesticide used in New Zealand and its impacts on New Zealand children in particular. Alison, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Asha. And I'm very pleased to be able to speak with you today, especially on World Environment Day. A group of us have put out a joint media release which has been embargoed until today, so look out for that. And if you do Facebook, share it. The more people that see it, the better. And what I'm going to talk about today is an important part of that, of the media release. So I'm Alison White. I am co-convenor of the Safe Food Campaign. And the Safe Food Campaign deals with a number of different issues, anything pertaining to food, basically, but we tend to focus on those issues that, for various reasons, the government does not want to deal with, or does not puts it in the too hard basket, whatever. And so today, I was just chatting with some of you beforehand. I live in Wellington, but the Safe Food Campaign is nationwide, but we began in Wellington. I guess the main, but before that, before the Safe Food Campaign began, I was part of the Toxins Action Group groups, and at the time at the peak there were 13 toxins action groups around New Zealand. And our toxins action group, for example, one of the things we did was present a petition on 245T to Parliament. And I don't know whether you've heard of 245T, but it's the other part of Agent Orange that has devastated parts of Vietnam and some returned soldiers from there. I'm going to be mentioning the other part briefly, though, in my talk. So that's just a little bit of background on me. I'm going to share what I hope will be a brief presentation, but you're very welcome to ask questions. Yeah, now I'll just I'll ask somebody, because I do have the option of turning on captions. The captions aren't always the best. Sometimes they're a bit laughable, but if anybody is hard of hearing, perhaps you could message Usher, and who will say whether to turn on the captions. They appear at the bottom of the screen. Okay. So what am I going to talk about? First of all, I'm going to talk about what is chlorpyrifos and why is it controversial. We'll talk about the New Zealand study that only came out in May this year, but it's been going for a few years. And what is chlorpyrifos in? What food is it in? Why children are at risk, and what can we do about the situation? All right. Sorry, I'm just distracting you a bit. Okay. So what is chlorpyrifos? It's a chlorinated organophosphate insecticide, and you may say, what does all that mean? Well, organophosphate is a type of insecticide, something to kill insects, and a lot of the organophosphates, including chlorpyrifos, began from the Second World War. The Nazis used different types of gases. They were experimenting with killing people and doing all sorts of things. And after the war stopped, there was all these chemicals left over. So some of them, they turned into organophosphates. So a similar thing happened after the First World War, but I won't go into that today. So chlorpyrifos is found in a wide variety of our food, including breast milk. And one study that I've looked at shows that 94% of people in the US have it in their bodies. So it's probably a not dissimilar story in New Zealand. It's very persistent. It persists in air, rivers, streams, Southern Alps, and even Antarctic. They've measured it in the Arctic for quite a while. So why is chlorpyrifos controversial? The most notorious aspect about chlorpyrifos is that there is a huge amount of research showing that it can permanently harm children's brains, especially the unborn child. But in spite of that, it took regulatory authorities around the world quite a while to act, and that could be discussed at more length. It's what we call an endocrine disruptor. So this means that it has an effect on the hormones, and this is especially crucial when the fetus is in the womb. But it has an effect on hormones, and young children are particularly susceptible to it. So minute amounts, such as we might find in food, can have an effect later in life. So some of the brain disorders that we're talking about are things like ADHD, cognitive disorders, infertility, prostate cancer, breast cancer. So any of these are likely to, it could happen from chlorpyrifos. There are also effects on the sperm, diabetes, obesity, liver, heart, birth defects can result from it. So there are a number of different bad effects from it. It's already been banned in several countries. The European Union, the US last year finally banned it altogether, and same with Canada. But in the US, it took a political battle well over 20 years before that came about. And just as they were going to do something about it in the US, and Obama put forward a measure to do something about it, to ban chlorpyrifos. Guess what? Trump got in and froze it all, so nothing happened. And in New Zealand, as in Australia, actually, it's been reassessed. It's on the reassessment list. It was on the reassessment list in 2020, but no doubt due to COVID and other things and plain inertia, it hasn't progressed beyond that. Wasn't that moving? Here is the study, which I'm going to talk about now. And this was published, it's got 2022 at the top, but it was actually May that it was published. And it's looking at New Zealand children. Neil Pearce is somebody I know. I've heard of Brenda Eskenazi. Yeah, and so if you're keen to chase it up, that's references. So I'll just go over some of the core aspects of the New Zealand study. So 953 urine samples were taken from 501 New Zealand children aged 5 to 14 years. So basically primary school kids, and they took more than one urine sample. They measured the urine sample for several what we call metabolites or breakdown products, and what they found was that pesticides were in more than 80% of the samples. So these included all a number of organophosphate metabolites, including chlorpyrifos, pyrethroids. Now these are another type of insecticide commonly found in fly spray, knit shampoo, dog collars, quite a few things, and 2,4-D, which is the chemical cousin of 2,4,5-T, and together these made up the notorious Agent Orange with dioxin, which is really bad news, contaminant resulting in the manufacture of it. Chlorpyrifos and chlorpyrifos methyl were found between 2 and over 7 times higher than in other countries, such as the US, Spain, and Thailand. Now, we mentioned chlorpyrifos methyl, because that is a chemical cousin of chlorpyrifos. Chlorpyrifos has been studied a lot. It's been studied in lots of, for example, where they measure the umbilical cord blood in mothers that have just given birth, and they've found chlorpyrifos in there, and then they've measured the progress of their children. And when I last looked, it was up to 11 years old, and the children had significantly more problems. Chlorpyrifos methyl, and another pesticide, triclopyr, all have the same metabolite. And so they're lumped together, but triclopyr isn't used as much, but chlorpyrifos, and especially chlorpyrifos methyl, are. What they found in the study is that the dietary intake is more important than other factors that they measured quite painstakingly, such as what season it was, whether it was urban or rural, and whether they were had sprays around at the time or not. Another finding was that pyrethroids were significantly higher with any pest control, and if you owned a dog, perhaps because it's in so many treatments for dogs. So what is it in? From the Total Diet Study in 2016, this is the last Total Diet Study that's been published. They don't do it very often in New Zealand. Frozen mixed berries, raisins, sultanas, peanut butter, peanuts, and bread, and anything containing wheat. So these were the most contaminated with chlorpyrifos. And what is chlorpyrifos and chlorpyrifos methyl in, apart from those four? Well, as I've already mentioned, anything containing Australian wheat. The chlorpyrifos methyl is not used in New Zealand, but we import quite a lot of wheat from Australia. And one of the good things we get from Australian wheat that we don't have so much in New Zealand is selenium, which is good for us. But one of the things that isn't so good for us that is in Australian wheat is chlorpyrifos methyl. So anything containing non-organic wheat, fish fingers, pies, muesli, pizza, scones, muffins, the list can go on and on. Grapes, of course, because sultanas and raisins come from grapes, tomatoes, avocados, a number of green vegetables, silver beet, spinach, Brussels sprouts, kylan, choysum, broccoli and peas. And you may ask, what is kylan? What is choysum? I had to look them up myself. Kylan is a type of Chinese broccoli. So it's broccoli with little heads, and choysum is a little bit similar, but slightly different. Other fruit that were found with residues detected were apricot, peach, pear, and mandarin, and also 4 baby food. So there's no doubt other stuff that chlorpyrifos and chlorpyrifos methyl are in, but these are the studies that I consulted to produce this table. Mostly, so these are government surveys. The Total Diet Study, we've talked about. The FRSP is what is again, surveillance on pesticides. This is a regular program, but they don't, that takes place every year, but they don't always test the same things. So what they test varies from year to year. And one year, I like to think, as a result of pressure that the Safe Food put on the government, one year they actually tested baby foods, and in this survey, 4 baby foods had chlorpyrifos in it.
Alice,
yep.
2 minutes, if that's okay.
Yep, so I'll rattle through it. So why are children at risk? They eat more in proportion to their body weight than other age groups. They're less able to metabolize certain chemicals such as organophosphates. And in the case of chlorpyrifos, newborns are 164 times more sensitive than adults. And exposure, even in minute amounts, can produce disease, serious disease later in life. And there's a quote from Gilles-Éric Seralini, who visited New Zealand: children's bodies have become garbage cans. And that's the sad reality of what we're doing, living in a toxic age. So what can we do? Go organic. This is the obvious choice for your health and the environment. And if you're buying non-organic food, avoid the dirty dozen. I haven't got time to talk about that today, but that's briefly fruit, bread, and leafy greens and salad greens, and imported produce. Eat in season, buy local, share what you know with others, and be ready to sign a petition coming up, which we didn't have time to organize for today's, but that's the plan, that we will circulate a petition asking the government to give priority to getting rid of chlorpyrifos. And that's a quote from Jane Goodall that I like. And the last one: every time you spend money, you're casting a vote for the kind of world you want. You can also follow us on our Facebook page, Safe Food NZ. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Alison. That was really interesting and very concerning. We've just had someone ask if they could get a copy of your PowerPoint, so maybe you could send that to me, and if you're willing to, and I can share it out to people who are on our list. Just to let everybody know, we are going to do the Q&A at the end, and while I know that's not ideal, I'd just ask you to write down your questions that you have so that we can get through our speakers and respect everyone's time. So thank you very much again, Alison. Very, very interesting. And also I have posted the link to the press release that Alison spoke about in the chat, so you can find that, and we'll also send out a link to the study, which you can easily search for online. So I'd like to, it looks like Claire Bleakley has not joined us yet. I have got in touch with her, but haven't heard back. So I'd just like to ask Dr. Wendy Pond, if she would turn on her video and unmute herself. And thank you, Alison. So Wendy, I'll let Claire, Alison and myself will pop out, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Tēnā tō katoa. The use of synthetic poisons is having a terrible effect on the natural world, because wildlife in its evolutionary processes has not developed means of dealing with these poisons. And of course, along with that goes terrible suffering. Asha, I'm not showing up. Can you see me?
Yes, yes, we can see and hear you loud and clear.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Now, because of these factors, the introduction of poisons in New Zealand predator control programs has required really radical changes to our parliamentary laws and to the organisation of the Department of Conservation. And so I want in this talk to run through some of the changes that we have observed over the last decade, particularly while the Director General of Department of Conservation was achieving such widespread popularity and acting in a way that was very convincing to the public. I've made case studies of each of the major 1080 drops on the Coromandel Peninsula, on Moihau Mountain in 2013, on Papakai, which is a lower part of the same range in the heart of the Coromandel Peninsula in 2017, on a small East Coast forest in 2019, and currently the scheduled drop on Moihau again for 2021-22. And over that time, I'm going to read out some of the major changes that we have observed. One of the things that scandalized us was as we came to realize that the personnel who were put in place in Department of Conservation did not have a skerrick of a degree in ecology or even biological sciences. And when we looked at the credentials of the Hauraki conservator, we discovered that he had begun as an engineer and then he had become an advisor to large corporations. And these credentials were considered appropriate for managing the Waikato area of the Department of Conservation. When we asked about the local Whitianga manager for our particular area in the Upper Coromandel Peninsula, we realized he was introducing himself at Hui's as Ngāti Matawenga, because he had come from the New Zealand Army. And earlier we had Melissa King Howell, and it was rumored that she had come from being the warden of a women's prison. So these were the people who were now managing DOC. And one of the other very noticeable moves that went along with this was the militarization of the handling of conservation. And we have a photograph from the first drop I studied in 2013 on Moihau, where our protest group and the police are standing either side of the boundary line at the loading site, and they're exchanging sandwiches for lunch. Then 34 years later at Papakai, we have a photograph of DOC staff standing in a line, astride, at attention all day in the wind and the sun, wearing bulletproof vests, standing behind an electrified fence. So that was a remarkable shift in the relationship between Department of Conservation and the public. And I'll just note here that one of the requirements for DOC in its best practice is that it maintains a relationship with the community, but clearly that is no longer of account. And alongside that, I'll also note that my own sister went to the DOC ranger in charge of the Papakai drop in 2017 and asked him why wasn't he consulting us. And he said, consultation is a waste of time because DOC is going to go ahead and do it no matter what you say. So again, this is a total breakdown in relationship with our community. Stephanie McKee had a look at the statements that DOC's DG Lou Sanson had made during his decade in office. And what she found that he was making statements about how the public conservation estate could be managed and developed so as to generate an income, particularly for tourism. So tramping huts were upgraded and clay walking tracks were reshaped so that they could be metalled and provide foot tracks for people not accustomed to walking in the bush, and so on. So this also, I personally find very distressing, the idea that conservation has really abandoned its original principles of maintaining and restoring habitat, and instead has become viewed as a utility to earn money for the government. And in that regard, also, I've come to mind that in the 1980s, the systematic scientists who are responsible for classifying New Zealand's flora and fauna, in the 1980s, they made representation to government saying that nature can look after itself provided it has satisfactory habitat. So at that time, conservation meant above all protecting habitat. And so there has been an enormous shift away from that. Another shift that has worried us very greatly as a community is that public participation in planning and carrying out and designing programs for predator control have been designed so that there is nowhere that the public can get in a foothold. The process has been removed from the Resource Management Act and placed under the Hazardous Substances Act. There's no longer a process of public notification and submission to independent commissioners and procedure to the Environment Court under appeal. All that had been provided for under the Resource Management Act. But now we found when we wrote to Environmental Protection Authority, which is in charge of this process under the HASNO Act, that we were told there will be no further correspondence with you. It was quite clear that it was not intended for the public to enter into the discussion with the permitting agency under EPA. Instead, the only avenue now available to the public is the way in which rangers, dock rangers, represent the public view to the government. We have no longer any direct voice. Also, another shift is the way laws have been amended. It is usual practice, the public expects that changes to the law will go through the entire parliamentary assembly. But now we have found that the Minister for the Environment has ordered amendments to acts which have gone only to Cabinet, often in an overnight decision, and no further discussion with our elected representatives. So in that way, the Resource Management Act section prohibiting the dropping of poisonous substances into stream beds was removed to give it, well, it was amended to give exemption to the use of 1080 and brodifacoum and rotenone. These were now exceptions to that protection. The Animal Welfare Act, which recognizes all animals as sentient, the protection was removed for any animal classed as a pest. And this, of course, in itself is an unlawful act because an amendment may not contradict the purpose of an act. So we have already in this last decade, the development of an intrinsically unlawful process for the use of TN80 and brodifacoum and other poisons destined for predator control. Now, there are many, many other examples that I've written down, but I want now to proceed to the next section of my talk, which is that docs, science and philosophy have invited criticism from scientists and of course from the general public and from people who are using the resources of the public conservation forests. However, that has fallen on deaf ears where the government is concerned. So there's a problem, is not only do we not have a path for our voice to the government, but when we act as a resistance movement, a public protest movement, the government makes no changes. And then I want to just address our response to this situation. Currently, finally, has been, we've had our say in every avenue we can think of. And what we need now is to build a wider, stronger movement, which is a positive step forward for ourselves. And so we have made ourselves into a poison-free movement. We are the land occupiers of the Upper Coromandel Peninsula, and we want to live in a poison-free environment. So our first step is to map the poison-free properties so that we can show this to our community board and our district council and the government to say, look, we want our peninsula to be poison-free. A great number of us are practicing that. Our voice has to be represented in the decisions you make. So we're trying this approach. And also, that's one very positive approach. Another, what I consider a most excellent approach is the mountains to the sea strategy, whereby landowners identify the catchment in which they live and they work together to restore wildlife habitat, work together cooperatively to restore wildlife habitat in their own catchment. And this goes back to the 1980s advice to government from the DSIR scientists, that if we create and maintain suitable habitat, wildlife will look after itself. And also now backing us are many international movements. Ecocide, Our Stolen Future has a website, Silent Spring has a website. So we can now, in working for a poison-free environment, place ourselves within those worldwide movements. So that's probably enough from me, except I will update you on what is happening with Moihau. With the poisoning due this month, our rangatira, the highest ranking rangatira in the Upper Coromandel Peninsula, put a rahui on the mountain saying chemical poisons are not to be used in our rohe. And DOC ignored that and said it was going ahead. So we shifted our strategy and we said, it's not an issue of the rahui. This rahui is an act of tino rangatiratanga. And under the 2018 Supreme Court decision, DOC has to act consistently with the Treaty of Waitangi. So we're waiting to hear from the DG. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Wendy. Yes. Yep. Very, very concerning again. And the militarization of conservation really sums it up right there. Thank you for your time today. And we'll send through actually some of those links. And if you want to provide anything to me to forward on to people, please do. And I'll just invite Rehana Robinson now, because Rehana is up there and has been working with you to try and prevent this latest drop on the sacred mountain Moihau. So welcome, Rehana. I'll just switch off and let you take the floor. And Wendy, if you want to stay on and join, or if you want to turn off, that's fine. Thank you.
Kia ora, ngā mihi kia koutou, ko rehana taku ingoa, he whāngai aho. As you can tell, we are so fortunate to have Wendy in our neck of the woods. And she has a lot of very useful correspondence that anyone who has I'm imagining that our audience is basically people on our team, but there's a lot that Wendy has uncovered that people will be unfamiliar with. And I know we've all got limited time and only so much energy to put into this kind of struggle, but it is a struggle to save Papatuanuku, our soil, our air, and working together. It's anyway, as I say, we are very fortunate to have Wendy. She does an immense amount of very detailed, excellent work. And just before I go on, I'd like to acknowledge the passing of one of our rangatira who was tōtara in our movement, and that is is Graham Sturgeon, who, as many people may know, suffered from the effects of Agent Orange due to his time in Vietnam. So just like to think about Graham for just a moment. I'd like to just highlight 4 items, and that is, Wendy mentioned the rahui, which to me is really, it's the best, the most brilliant, it's the brightest star on our horizon, because every other thing we try, and as Wendy says, we go exactly according to the law, according to everywhere, and we make all these correspondences and requests. And basically, as far as I'm concerned, the rahui is really, and their respect for Tino Rangatiratanga and Francis, hopefully will win through this year. That's the thing that I have all my hopes on. But we have on the Coromandel a very strong predator-free group, which, as you know, nationally has had over millions of dollars poured into it. And to the extent that we understand that up here, they're paying for influencers, people to come and teach little entrepreneurial enviro groups how to basically how to manipulate media, how to actually make their propaganda, because we all support trapping, we all support humane wild animal control, but we do not support inhumane wild animal control. And we also, we're up against a lot of money pouring in for that at the moment. So following on from that is the other issue that we have to deal with, and that is censorship, because no matter how well you write a press release on an important topic, getting that published is really, really difficult. And then, of course, countering the lies that are published, like Doc made a lovely press release about how Kiwi are really thriving on Moihau. And they certainly did for the first 10 years. Their numbers doubled. It was a huge increase. And but since then, it has not been the same increase. But of course, in the first 10 years, it was just trapping and some bait station work. So this is a maunga that can be walked, it can be trapped. They don't need their propaganda to say that they can't access it. So we've got to deal with the money coming in from predator free. We've got to deal with the lies. We've got to deal with how difficult it is to get information out. And for example, my entire email, I could not correspond with anybody at the Waikato District Health Board, and I've only finally got the OIA back on that, and they made a terrible mistake because it's totally illegal what they did. They just meant to stop me from communicating with one person with whom I was asking questions, who obviously felt threatened. So I think I'd like to just finish with a completely different thing, if that's all right. And it's a poem about our mountain, just for a different little flavor here. It's called "O Moihau Mountain, How Much Can You Take?" O Moihau, we want to live in you. We want to dance naked in your arms, your branches, your foliage. We drink your wild waters, your laughing creeks, your sweet nectar. We embrace all those limbs hanging out for birds. We will shave our armpits for you. We will abandon chastity, but never friendship. We will fornicate until the cows come home. And when the unfrienders come with their helicopters and drones, we will hold hands like Te Whiti o Rongomai. We will sit down and cross our arms and legs, and like your red-haired fairy queens and kings, we will be peacemakers. We will imbibe kava like our Pacific cousins, and far into a future we cannot pass. Oh moi, how young lovers will rise, wet, bejeweled, red-haired, and smooth-skinned, singing the old songs. This is the way the old story keeps passing through. Ngā mihi kia koutou. Thank you, Asha, for everything.
Thank you very much, Reihana. That was beautiful. Yeah, and I'm with you both 100%. I think all of us are, in regards to this whole poison-free movement and staking a claim in the ground that this is our territory, this area is poison-free, and that is our kaupapa. And so and just moving that forward as much as we can, and connecting up with the organic movements and all of these other movements that are intertwined, and actually starting to really evolve that and starting to actually make it be known that this is not okay, and we actually as communities are actually taking back control of these areas. I know we've got a similar movement up here in Northland, and so it's just through these dialogues and through inspiring each other and connecting, and all of this connection, is not just connecting us, but it's connecting Papatūānuku, and anchoring in what we want to bring in, and do away with all of these nasty ass chemicals. So thank you both. Thank you very, very much. Yeah, that was beautiful. And if you have that written down, Reihana, and you want to share it, please send it through to me. Would love to share that further. And if anyone wants to see the recent press release that was put out in regards to Moihau, you can just search on Scoop and search for Sacred Mountain Moihau, and you'll find out more about what's going on there. Yeah, so thank you both. Cool. All right, well, I haven't heard back from Claire, so if any of you were joining us to hear from Claire Bleakley from GE Free NZ, we might have to do another separate video with her. So I might just jump in and have my turn. I was going to bring up some discussion around food sovereignty. So I'll just get your video off, Wendy, and I'll take over. All right. So food sovereignty. I mean, for a long time, I've been worried about food security. And I think that that's obviously something that's really coming to a head at the moment, with a lot of geopolitical happenings in the world, with a lot of big shifts, maybe some of it beginning with this whole COVID pandemic. But now we have, conflict over in the Ukraine and Russia, and supply chains, and a lot of these things are being heavily disrupted. Prices are increasing, just daily, and things are becoming less available and more expensive. And this goes, fuel, fertilizers, all of it, even some of these chemicals that are being used, because they are petrochemicals. They are essentially fossil fuels as well. So the price on those is increasing, and it's becoming increasingly unsustainable to actually produce food like this. So going back to food security, when I think of food security, it really is quite limited in its scope, and it doesn't start to address some of these other issues around food, around our environment, around our own health. So food sovereignty is what really captures that. And so if you haven't heard of food sovereignty, I'd just like to read a little bit about what it is, and then maybe cover a little bit of what we know is wrong with our current food system and some of the things that we can do and are doing to change it and shift it, the emergent solutions that are coming forward, and how all of these kind of poison industrial complex things and food kind of intersect, and food sovereignty really do intersect. And so we kind of had the problems on one side and all the solutions on the other, and it's just a matter of making these connections and starting to really claim that and redevelop it. So let's have a look at food sovereignty. And this is a little definition that ties in the difference. What's the difference between food security and food sovereignty? And this is taken from a website called changeforchildren.org, and is I believe it's a Canadian website. There's been a lot of work done on food sovereignty, particularly in Indigenous communities, which is understandable. It's about reclaiming, a lot of their traditional food and reconnecting themselves, but it's actually for everybody. So let me read this. Food sovereignty is different to food security in both approach and politics. Food security does not distinguish where food comes from or the conditions under which it's produced and distributed. So national food security targets are often met by sourcing food produced under environmentally destructive and exploitative conditions, and supported by subsidies and policies that destroy local food producers, but benefit agribusiness corporations. Whereas food sovereignty emphasizes ecologically appropriate production, distribution, and consumption, social economic justice, and local food systems as a way to tackle hunger and poverty. Now, I would just say here that while we might not necessarily be dealing with hunger and poverty in a similar sense to some other countries in New Zealand, it really goes also back to health of our own physical bodies and our environment. And then everything else that goes along with that in regards to how far food travels, who grows it, whether it's corporatized, whether it's created by local people, who is actually growing the food. So food sovereignty advocates trade and investment that serve the collective aspirations of society. It promotes community control of productive resources in regards to food. And policies, we as communities and food growers should be able to have influence over the policies that dictate how food is grown. So it really goes back to food being in the power of grassroots communities. There are 7 basic tenets that have come out of food sovereignty, and these have been deliberated at forums. So there's 7 pillars that came out of the food sovereignty conference in Mali in 2007. So these 7 pillars, I'm just going to bring them up here on a screen share so that you can see, just to help us get an understanding of kind of where this idea is headed. So this is taken from foodsecurecanada.org. What is food sovereignty? We have the 7 pillars here. It focuses on food for people. It puts people's needs for food at the center of policies and insists that food is more than just a commodity. We really need to get away from this idea of a product, a commodity, and a consumer. We're so much more than that. And those just reduce us and our food, down to, mere reductionist factors when they're actually, we need that holistic approach. Number 2, food sovereignty builds knowledge and skills. It's about the transfer between generations and peoples of skills on how to grow. It builds on traditional knowledge. It uses research to support and pass this knowledge to future generations. And it rejects technologies that undermine or contaminate local food systems. It works with nature. So it's ecologically sound. It's holistic. It optimizes the contribution of ecosystems. It improves resilience. Number 4, it values food providers. They are incredibly important assets in our communities. I mean, it's food. So the people that are growing our food, we need to value them. Supports sustainable livelihoods and respects the work of all food providers. It localizes food systems. Now, this is just so important, you know, in this day and age of globalization, when we're getting stuff from halfway around the world. That's all good and well, but it's a vulnerability, and we're starting to feel that now, you know, and there's also a lack of control around the process of how that food might have been grown. So localizing food systems is another thing that actually ties in responsibility, local responsibility. So it reduces the distance between food providers and consumers, rejects the dumping and inappropriate food aid. It resists dependency on remote and unaccountable corporations. Number 6, it puts control locally. It places control in the hands of local food providers. It recognizes the need to inhabit and to share territories. It rejects the privatization of natural resources. And number 7, which was something that was added at a later time, which is just so fundamentally important, and really, really ties into the Indigenous impetus to reclaim food sovereignty, is food is sacred. And that's something that we all really need to begin to connect with and understand, because what you put in your mouth is your own health. So food is sacred, and it's a gift that comes from the earth, and from our ancestors, you know, our ability to be able to cultivate over so many generations and bring through seeds and different kinds of fruit and vegetables that, you know, that tie us and anchor us culturally to our ancestors. So food is sacred. It recognizes that food is a gift of life and not to be squandered. And it asserts that food cannot be commodified. So those are just, I suppose, you know, there's a lot there, but really it's around this philosophical view of shifting to a more holistic way of growing our food, of eating our food, of sharing our food with each other, and bringing back that culture into it in a local, you know, localized way. So I just would like to also cover maybe a few of the problems with the current system, and then go into a little bit about what we're doing and some of the things that I've noticed that will help us in this transition. So what are the problems with the current system? Well, we know, we're talking about it a lot. It's chemical laden, and that results in poor health of people. And these are people throughout the whole supply chain, the people growing the food, the people packing the food, and then us, the people at the end of the line who are consuming that food. And of course, the damage to the soils and the environment, the soil and water, you know, from all of these chemical inputs. It's not local, you know, it's being tracked halfway around the world, which leads to weak and vulnerable food systems where we can be at the mercy of whether something is available or not, you know, whether there's a conflict happening somewhere. So it's such a huge vulnerability, and it also is just such a big disconnection when most of your food, you know, may be being imported and coming from elsewhere and not from your local area, not to mention the travel miles and all that involved. So this is a big one, and it relates to, you know, the chemical issue is the corporate capture of the regulatory system when it comes to food. This is a major issue, and that leads into the subsequent lack of accountability when it comes to people being harmed and our environment being harmed by these chemicals. And that's something that we have seen a lot with the People's Inquiry with which we're involved, people's stories, their accounts of being harmed by chemical exposure through a variety of ways, but they always end typically with no accountability, no change to the regulatory system, and that is largely because of corporate capture. So the current food system, we're very disconnected from our food and its ability to heal us. And we're also disconnected from the people growing it. You know, how many of us know, you know, typically, you know, who grew the wheat for our bread, or, you know, who grew those potatoes that we're buying? If we're not growing them ourselves, or we don't have a good relationship with the local grower, you know, there's just such an obvious disconnection there. And there's also some other stuff afoot really with our food systems, and many of you may have noticed it. One thing in particular that I've been noticing, I think, is this impetus to push towards a transhumanist techno-fix type of food, creation of food, creating food in labs, over-processing food to the point where it actually is no longer food. You know, a lot of these fake meats that have come out, and a lot of them include GE, you know, GE products. So, I mean, are they really food? So they're becoming so far removed from actual food, you know, and that's a huge problem in itself in terms of the health problems that it will cause. So those are just a few of the many, many issues that we have with our current food system. So how do we begin to deal with it? It's such an epic, massive, just like the, you know, what we're dealing with the chemical companies. It's such a huge issue. But things are shifting actually on their own because of a lot of things that are happening in the world. You know, as I said before, prices for many of these products are actually going to get to a point, and they are getting to a point where they're becoming unaffordable. So things are actually, they're having to change. And unfortunately, that may involve, and likely will involve, the collapse of certain areas of our food system. But for me, I always like to look at the silver lining, because there's something happening in behind that. And are we trying to hold on to and prop up something that we know is actually destructive anyway? So, okay, what's been happening up here in Northland? And a lot of this has been triggered by, you know, since the COVID pandemic and some of the other geopolitical conflicts that have been happening, is people have become triggered, they've become, their sense of awareness has become heightened, that they need to act, they need to start thinking about food security. And with that comes the concept of sovereignty. So we've got community gardens that are actually blossoming all around the country. You know, and they're not easy things to do, you know, but people are starting to come together in large groups and starting to actually take action. So community gardens, those are happening. People are getting in each other's backyards. You know, this is something I've seen a lot in Auckland. I know a friend who is going around with a team of people, and they are installing gardens in people's backyards. And I think they're up to the hundreds. So, you know, that's just a whole process of introducing people to the idea that you can grow a certain amount of food in your backyard, and quite easily, and enjoy it too. So backyards, we are seeing seed saving groups pop up as people are, you know, really understanding how precious these things are, and how important it is that we are proper stewards and kaitiaki to them, and that we have that as security for our future. Something that we've been working on here in Northland that's been really successful, and I think that is happening all around the country as well, is crop swaps. People getting together to share produce, fruit, veggies, plants, cuttings, seeds from their gardens. And we have gone from doing 2 crop swaps a month over the last year to now having around 8 a month. And so there's literally hundreds of people getting together every month, sharing from their gardens. And you know, these are open to people that maybe don't have anything to bring, but want to learn. So it's an opportunity to connect with other people around something that we all have in common, and that's food. So it's, you know, I think that actually food could be healing for us in more than one way, not just for our physical being, but actually bringing people together on a common ground, and healing perhaps some of the divisions that have been created between people. What else? So one of the interesting things with our crop swaps, which is really cool actually, is that we've actually linked up with local food providers, local organic growers, and we've said, hey, we want to have a crop swap on your property, and we're hoping that, you know, the people who come to the crop swap will then stop in at your organic shop, you know, just to get the extra stuff that they need, because the crop swap is great, but we're not actually getting everything that we need from that. So there's always extra things that we need. So how can we then support other local food providers? So they've allowed us to have crop swaps, you know, on there. We've got two places. One is Kerikeri Organic, where there's a beautiful shop there. People can stop and get the extra things that they need and support this local organic producer, grower. And then we also have Mahaui Cheese Farm, where the cheesemakers have the cheese shop, and sometimes they open the cheese shop after the crop swap that's held on the Mahaui farm. And so, you know, we're trying to find ways that we can support the people who are already doing the really important good work, and just create connections and relationships. So there's a lot more opportunity to do that. And so we're just on this journey. And one of the other things that's come up that I think we really need to start thinking about as well, we live in a food growing region up here in the Bay of Islands, Whangaroa, far north. There are a lot of lifestyle blocks with orchards that are not getting picked. There's a lot of food going to waste. So, you know, part of the next, you know, some of the next things that we might do, you know, is start actually linking in and seeing how we can actually help to start harvesting and you know, and making use of some of that food. And a lot of them, you know, will be organic by default. There's olive orchards, citrus orchards, you know, all kinds of properties with amazing fruit trees that are just really nothing's happening with them. So there's an opportunity there to link in with that, and actually start, you know, making that available to people. So that's a lot there. Let's see. So just a couple very quick points on what you can do. Yeah, start growing. I think we all know that, and many of us have already started. Some of us have been growing for eons. If you have that knowledge, pass it on. Maybe set up a crop swap in your area. Join a community garden. They don't always work. You know, often they fall over, but it's about the journey. It's about connecting with people, and it's about finding solutions together. And the other point, I guess, is the time is right for this. So, you know, it's much more likely to be supported and to be successful. Support local producers as much as you can. And yeah, I guess I'd just finish off by saying, remember, it's a process of learning together and reorienting ourselves to, you know, new habits, creating new habits, reclaiming some of our values and wisdom and tradition, and creating new traditions. Yeah, so I'd like to leave it there. Thank you very much. So what I'll do now is invite whoever would like to turn their video on to jump on, and our speakers, would you mind rejoining me and turning your videos on? Oh, we've just got Claire joining right now. Just might see if we can give Claire a little bit of time. She's just joined us now. Claire, are you there?
I am. I'm so sorry. We had a power cut. Somebody went into a power pole and it came on just about 1:15, but I didn't click. So sorry for being late. So sorry.
No worries. I've just finished. And would you, if it's okay with everybody, Claire, is it okay if we give you 10 minutes? Would you still like to speak?
I will be really happy to speak. I can share the screen. I've got something I can quickly run through, and probably will try and go for, say, 7 minutes.
Okay. Yeah.
And then a few minutes. So welcome everybody. Dreadfully sorry that
would you like to bring your video on? So
I will try. I'm not sure. Do you go to screen to, I think, yep, keep talking, everybody. Start my video.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for your patience, everybody. Here's Claire Bleakley from GE Free NZ. Yeah, lucky last perfect timing there at the end.
So sorry for the lateness. Okay. Now, I think most of it, everybody will know a little bit about the concerns that we have around synthetic biology and new genetic engineering technologies. I know that there's a lot of you who are well versed also in this. So I'll quickly go through, and I apologize if I'm repeating. And if I am, please say we've heard this before, and I'll move on. So we do have some concerns. There is a new form of genetic engineering called gene editing. There are 3 main types. There are a few others.
Claire,
yes.
Have you got something covering your video camera?
I do. Sorry. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see you now. Thank you. Okay, please.
Okay. I wasn't sure. Sorry. Yes, I do have something covering my video camera. Can you see the screen share?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. So I'll go back. So there are 3 types of enzymes that have been adapted to cut the DNA. And what happens is the biggest one is the CRISPR one, the C one. And its chief drawback is once inside it's the cell, it can cut at undesired sites. But what it has also been found is in the ensuring progeny, this is very new, just come out, in the ensuring seeds that this does, every time the new seed tries to mend and revert back to its original case, this will keep cutting out the genes. So what happens is it produces off-target cuts. These can produce new proteins, cell death, but it can also affect other genes and how they work. So it's called off-target effects.
Thank you. Claire, would you mind just tilting your laptop down a bit so we could see your whole face? Yeah, perfect. Okay. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Sorry. So I just love what you're all doing at the Flora and Fauna. And Kaitiaki, the guardianship of our natural environment. Humans are part of the natural world. It's sustainable. There is mana a Māori, which respects the life force of the natural world. When you go over to genetic engineering, and genetic engineering in this space, I call all forms of in vitro, from transgenics, cisgenics, gene editing, gene drives, all of this. Usually they're corporate patented, biopirated from nature. They say man owns the natural world. Most of the things that are being developed are reliant on pesticides. A lot of these are now sterility. So of course that spiritualness is removed. The loss of the natural life force, and all are created in a laboratory. I'll go through this very quickly. That last slide was just all the places in the world that have adopted GMOs or still need to be regulated. Pleasingly, New Zealand still has some very strong regulation, which is being undermined at the moment, and we need to keep a lot of care on that. So, because the environmental integrity is challenged, there are big ecosystem effects, spray drift, soil degradation, increased pesticide applications. So in 1995, when GMOs were first introduced into the world, there was around about 90 million kilograms used. In 2019, there are now 140 million kilograms. So it is a little bit of a lie to say that GMOs are going to reduce pesticides. Interestingly, in Europe, where it's not used, pesticide use has dropped significantly by about 1/3. So it's only really in the places where GMO crops are used that herbicides have gone up. However, in these places where more herbicides are used, there are now 42 weeds resistant to glyphosate-based herbicides. And some of these plants, the toxicity is produced in every plant cell, and it increases with the plant age. Here's a very quick thing on Roundup. There are 3 pictures. One was GMO without any herbicide used on it, it still produced a tumour. 2 or 3 tumours were produced in GMOs with Roundup, but more and more, same amount of tumours with Roundup on its own. Since this study was published, there have been no further studies on GE and its effects on animals or humans. Gene editing has no environmental or health safety studies, and FSANZ does not require safety studies to be conducted when assessing food safety. So this GMOs affected reproductive organs, which of course, that's where the sterility comes in. Growth was stunted. There were changes to liver and kidney function and immune system depletion. This came out on the 5th of May. This is a tagline: vicious hamsters bred in genetic lab accident. What they did is they tried to modify a hormone that they thought would calm animals in cages, and instead it made them more aggressive. And the study author said, we don't understand the system as well as we thought we did. We need to think the whole system, not just single genes. So these animals, these hamsters, started attacking the other males really aggressively. So evidence changes. As we see in 1950, cigarettes was the thing to do. In 2000, warnings came on the cigarettes. 70, Vietnam was sprayed with 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. In 2010, these are still the effects produced from that spraying, and the veterans are still dying from the Agent Orange. Thalidomide, of course, was done for women in pregnancy and morning sickness. It was supposed to be really safe, and the child's life may depend on the safety of Distaval, which of course was thalidomide. And this is a child who had to suffer some of the effects of thalidomide. And of course, the biggest one, DDT. It was sprayed everywhere. 1947, there were ads on the radio, DDT is good for me. However, it found later in 1970 that there was severe environmental effects on the chicks and the frogs. Eggs had thinner shells and things like that. In 1995, GMO crops, transgenic, were introduced, and this is the kind of sprays they were able to tolerate. And these are the workers. This has a health effect. Look how thin he is in 2015. There are many intergenerational liabilities. Our GE technologies are safe, we are told. This is false. There is no evidence of safety, but evidence of harm, and damage is persistent. GE trees and crops will be sterile. This is false. GE sterility pine cuttings produce viable reproductive structures at 2 years old. China had sterile poplars, and they produced catkins, and now they've got problems with catkin dispersal. They say no significant damage to biodiversity. This is false. There's loss of food sources for insects, birds, and animals, negative impacts on the soil, mycorrhiza, and ecosystems. GE is precise. False. Off-target effects, sorry, I've gone the wrong way. Off-target effects can cause devastating heritable errors. Changes in the single genes may threaten whole ecosystems. What we now know, there are many viable alternatives in the natural world. The long-term adverse effects of gene editing and genetic engineering are serious on the soil, water, and air, and the health of communities and workers. The whole of the trophic ecosystem is disrupted. It's unable to be recalled once released. Coexistence is impossible. There are unintended and off-target effects, environmental health effects from new proteins, gene deletions, or gene insertions. And there is still the hazards of horizontal gene transfer and the effects of GE exudates on the soil, pollens, and reproduction. So we are still, New Zealand, proud to be GE-free, and we ask that a precautionary approach on the long-term effects is always taken, because there are nothing, we know that they are unknown and dangerous. Significant damage to the ecosystem, safety to communities, environment and economic livelihoods must be protected and understood. And the release of GE organisms in Aotearoa must be a prohibited activity. Just to say, there are masses of really fantastic solutions, and go organic, which is GE free and pesticide free. And this is for the health of others to come. So thank you very much. And here is the references. And I'm happy, Aisha, to send you this PowerPoint if anybody would like to look at it further. And sorry for rushing, but I hope I've come in within the time.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Claire. Would you just, yep, great. Okay, yeah, thank you, Claire. There's so much there, but it's all interconnected, really. Yeah. Well, what I'll do now is I'll just ask, could our speakers please put their videos back on, and we'll get all the speakers on video, and then I will open the floor to questions. So could we have Alison and Wendy? I think Reihana had to, oh, she's still here. If you have time, Reihana, please join us again.
Asha, please restart my video for me.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Wendy. Okay. Perfect. Okay, great.
Let's get some pictures so you can actually.
Ah, yes. Very good.
Sorry.
Cool. All right. And Reihana, would you like to join us for some question time? All right. I'm not sure if she's there. So, yeah, thank you, everybody. What was that?
Just sent a note through. Apologies, have to leave.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Once Claire's presentation. Can I just mention briefly that in chat, I've put a file attachment of my presentation as a PDF form. So if you can download this file from chat, well and good. If not, I've also sent a copy to Usher, who will send it on, or failing that, you can ask me, alison@safefood.org.nz.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alison. Yes, I've got that. And Claire, if you wouldn't mind sending yours, if you're happy to share it, send it through to me.
Absolutely.
Right. And just, I'm not sure if everybody who's joining us today is on our email list, but if you would like to be on our email list and make sure that you get, these documents sent through, maybe just pop your email in the chat and I'll copy it and add you to our network list so that you find out when these things are happening and get any documents that are sent out. So thank you all for your time today speaking, and would like to open the floor up to anybody who had any specific questions for any of our speakers to either unmute yourself. Oh, we've got Stephanie there, or you can type it in the chat. Okay, yeah. Stephanie, did you have a question?
Well, I just want to greet everyone and thank the speakers. I'm sorry I missed yours, Hannah, but I'll read the paper. And it can be psychologically overwhelming, the kaupapa that we are dealing with. On the one hand, we want to change the systems, the paradigms, the mindsets. On the other hand, we're trying to create new ways of living in community, growing food, and all of that. So it can be really overwhelming, but I have to cling to hope. And so I look out for various signs along the way. And I don't know about you, but I succumbed to watching the Queen's party this morning because I've been a music teacher. So there's some great music and it was quite uplifting, I have to say. And to hear Rachel Carson being mentioned and honoured, and and quite a theme of environment there. That was heartening. The other little sign I come back to is the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment's report on knowing what's out there. He sent this to the EPA in March, and that's worth having a look at. It's just a sign of a shift in thinking that, of course, is way too slow and way not radical enough, but we have to have these signs of hope. And I also want to end, thank you, Reihana, for your poem. I'm on a bit of a writing retreat, and I just want to read you a very short poem because I think a sense of humour is necessary to keep us going. And there are great networks joining up all around the place. And there's the Professor of Sociology, Manuel Valle, I've had a talk with. He's actually studying the manipulation of information around the previous People's Inquiry. And this is a whole field of the information war that we are dealing with. So just to end on a slightly humorous note, I wrote this, 2005. Let us spray. Our sprayer who art in heaven, hello, here comes your plane, again and again and again. Thy poisons come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily dose of bioaerosols and hormone gases. Hard to forgive these chemical trespassers against us and our families, our lads and lasses. Lead us not into health complications, but deliver us from this evil over all the nations. For thine is the power and the money and the endless public relations. Oh, men.
Very good, thank you.
Okay. Just for a bit of a laugh, and it's not all men, of course, but we do have a sort of a problem in that how come 90% of the environmental activists seem to be women? So thank you to all our brothers and husbands who are on the journey. Okay.
All right. No
Sorry,
questions,
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to connect.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephanie. And for those that don't know Stephanie, she is one of our committee for the People's Inquiry 2020 and was part of the original People's Inquiry in 2006 to the spraying of Auckland suburbs for the painted apple moth. Yeah, so thank you for that, Steph. So is there anyone who has a question? Wendy? Yes?
Yes, I'd like to put a question myself. I keep asking myself, what are the actions that really have impact? And on the negative side, what I've seen tragically in Tonga, in the Pacific, is that the government sold fishing rights, and this has meant that on these Pacific atolls where people depend as much on the sea as on the land for their survival, in the small atolls, people cannot catch fish. So if I could ask for anything of world governments, it would be to declare that the inland waters belong to the local communities so they can sustain themselves. Then a second thing that worries me very greatly, what's happened in Tonga, is that tracts of land were leased and amalgamated so that people could grow squash for the Japanese market. Those soils, now that the market has collapsed, those soils are long-term poisoned. So again, people can't retrieve their land, their garden land, to sustain themselves. So the long-term impacts of poisons, whether they're for predator control or growing crops, this seems to me a vital action to withdraw the use of poisons. So I would be very interested if anyone else has thoughts on what are the really crucial actions that are happening or that we could make.
Claire.
Thank you, Wendy. That was really great. So what I think is we personally have got a lot of power in how we buy. And if we live the way we want our world to look, we may think it's only one person, but we will make a little patchwork quilt, which will all join up and we all do it our own way. So what we're asking within the GE Free movement is please use your buying power to buy organic and and maybe all our food that's locally grown is non-GMO, so support local, buy organic or GMO free. So as a consumer, you just cannot sell your product if it is going to be genetically engineered. So we feel that each one of us has the power to live the way we feel our world should look, and it will influence others. So Wendy, I hope that is a suggestion. And of course, the Tongan people, what we can do in Aotearoa is try and support those people to actually reclaim their land through their old sustainable indigenous ways. I think we've got to be careful not to impose the Pākehā organic system, when really, when you go there, they've all got their own ways of doing it, like huapara kore and stuff. So if we recognize that each country is sovereign, we can support it to doing what it does best, safely as it can. So yes, thank you for raising about Tonga, so we can actually look at that. Sorry.
Alison, and then Hannah wanted to mention something.
Yeah, I very much endorse what Claire has said, and the questions, the valuable questions that Wendy raised. And I think that we can conceive of a network. So we begin with ourselves. We branch that out to our families and our neighbourhoods in the excellent sounding scheme that Usha mentioned of crop swaps. And it extends, but beyond that, there's the political arena, which means making submissions, which means presenting a petition. So what we're planning to do in the near future is to present a petition to Parliament on getting rid of chlorpyrifos. It's just one of the many things that is wrong with our current system and the toxic age that we live in. And you can argue, well, that's only one thing, but it's raising awareness for everyone that is important. And I've discovered from years of doing this that presenting a petition, circulating a petition is a very good way to raise people's awareness, even if it doesn't have much result politically. In the end, it'll sow seeds in people's minds, and I think that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Hannah, did you want to add something?
Yes, picking up on Wendy's original question and referring back to Stephanie's poem and the first hour of spring, you know, have we ever achieved anything? What have we actually managed to prevent or happen? And one of the conclusions that both Steph and I came to was that whilst when we did the first People's Inquiry, which was into the aerial spraying of Waitakere City with pesticides, as well as Hamilton and Eastern Auckland, what we eventually achieved through that, and it was damn hard work, was a final report. And although none of the recommendations, 27 of them, were ever implemented, as Steph and I both know, the government has never, ever sprayed the public over urban areas with any kind of pesticide. So we cross our fingers that our action, although on paper it doesn't look as if we've achieved anything, we believe actually has, because it wasn't just our report, it was the fact that the Ombudsman did a report as well. And again, none of his recommendations were implemented. But the fact is that we stopped it. And now we have got, here in Auckland anyway, we've had policies, as I explained to Alison, before you all joined us, is that here on Waiheke Island, over 30 years of non-chemical roadside and park treatment. Now, nobody knows about this. Nobody knows that Auckland City is fundamentally, at least half of its population has had 20 years of non-chemical. And yet, in spite of policies that have been hard-won, non-chemical policies that were developed by Muriel Watts back in the end of the 90s and the 2000s, and then again when we had to redo it for the super city in 2013, that policy has never been implemented. Today, we are still fighting to stop them returning glyphosate to all the roadsides, in spite of the fact that non-chemical hot water treatment has been highly successful, incredibly comparatively cheap compared to glyphosate. We are still fighting it. And now we have the whole climate issues. The same thing is happening again. I mean, I won't bore you with what has happened here on Waiheke, but for the last 2.5 years, I have been trying to get awareness raised about simple things that can be done here on the island, particularly with transport, things that don't cost a cent, but don't appear in any plans. Oh, well, we're going to fund this and this is what we want to put up to the top. Doesn't cost anything, and because it doesn't cost anything, it doesn't appear in any plans, therefore nobody wants to look at it. But there was, I would really say to you, there was a really interesting article printed in Newsroom, actually it was from The Nation, which I think we have to think about, because whilst we can all do the things like, there's nothing more that we can do in our house that will help to save the climate. We've got photovoltaic cells, we've got insulation coming, we're passive, we don't have heating. All of those things that we can do individually, I have done, but we're still in a climate crisis. So what more can be done? And this particular article, which really, guys, it's called Nice Isn't Going to Save the Planet. And that's really what it's about. We have been so nice. We have done our petitions, we've done our appeals, we've gone to the select committees, we've gone to MPs, we've done in all of our areas a huge amount of work, but we're still fighting it. So nice is not going to save the planet. And I'll just, if you'll indulge me, I will read a paragraph from this story. And it says, the reality is that climate activists spent decades politely asking for the world's leaders to please act on this thing that is going to kill millions. They held respectful dialogue in respectable forums. They produced charts and came up with a plethora of acceptable solutions that, had they been enacted on a reasonable timescale, would not have posed a dramatic threat to the status quo. Over and over again, they met bad faith actors in good faith, and in response, they were lied to and saw little meaningful action. Is political corruption evil? Is it polite for a senator, this is America, to risk dooming the planet before sailing off on the yacht he bought with the $500,000 he earns every year from the fossil fuel industry? And I mean, the article concludes with, if you're more concerned about manners than survival, understand that that is a luxury. If you are fighting for a livable future, Isn't that worth a little discomfort? After all, if you find civil disobedience unpleasant, you're going to hate climate change. Compromise and civility are the comforts of the rich and powerful. If we want elites to act, we're going to have to make their complacency uncomfortable, and it's going to require some incivility.
Thank you, Hannah. Yes. Well, I am afraid we have run out of time. And while I would really love to keep this conversation going, and we should pick it up, I think maybe, you know, with whoever's interested at a later date, if it's okay with everybody, can we finish there for today?
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who's joined us to listen in. This recording, I'll probably post it up on Monday and send out an email with some of those documents and people's contact information in case you want to get in touch with any of our speakers. But yeah, once again, today is a day to think about our environment and consider all of these things and our place in it. What's that, Steph?
Sorry, I was just saying hello to Laurie.
Okay. Laurie popped on there at the end. Yeah. All right. Well, but thank you very much for your time today. It's been amazing. It's so important that we connect, and we need to do this more often to just keep sharing what works and keep sharing information, because a lot of this information is not reaching people, and we need to be aware and actually understand what's happening and what the solutions are, and start connecting with people that we can actually make some practical steps forward on. So thank you, everybody. We'll finish there. All right.
Thank
Enjoy the
you,
rest of the
Asha,
weekend.
for bringing us together.
Yes.
That's
You're
great.
welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you for all your work. It's really amazing. And the civil disobedience can still be very passive. And as you can see, probably we've won some of the hearts. We just need to win a few more.
Yeah, definitely.
Just to say, in 1995, they were hoping that New Zealand would be GE. We would have GE throughout the whole Roi. And we've kept it out.
Yeah.
So, you know, kia kaha, we do need to stand strong. So thank you for your support, everybody.
Thank you. Kia kaha, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the long weekend, and we'll connect again soon.
Thank you, Asha.
Okay. Ka kite.
Bye.
Ka kite anō.
Bye-bye.